The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd ask consent to complete my remarks before the next vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we've all been inspired by the courage and leadership of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. As Russian troops have invaded and brutally attacked his country, President Zelensky did not do as others have done in the past. He didn't run, he didn't hide, and he didn't give in. President Zelensky did what every leader hopes to have the courage to do in times of crisis. He stood his ground, spoke out, and rallied the rest of the world to get behind him. Yesterday, as we all know, members of Congress had a chance to hear directly from President Zelensky. First, he expressed his gratitude to the United States for the support we've provided so far to his country, but he also issued an urgent plea for more defense articles. He showed us a videotape of devastating photos and videos coming out of Ukraine, demonstrating what the Ukrainian people are being subjected to every day by Putin's cruel and unprovoked war against innocent civilians. Ukrainian troops need more arms. They need anti-tank capabilities, and they need additional aircraft. As President Zelensky put it, the destiny of Ukraine is being decided now as we speak. I believe we have a moral obligation, not necessarily a treaty obligation, since Ukraine isn't part of NATO, but we have a moral obligation as the leader of the free world, and I'm talking about the United States as a whole, to support Ukraine and help them defend their sovereignty and their people. For example, Poland, a member of NATO, offered to transfer an entire fleet of MiG-29 fighters to the United States for delivery to Ukraine. Ukrainian forces already know how to fly those Russian aircraft, and President Zelensky assured us that they are desperately needed. But the Biden administration rejected the offer out of fear that it might provoke Mr. Putin, or in the terms of war, it might escalate the conflict. Winston Churchill, another great wartime leader, aptly said, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last." This cannot be the policy of the United States. We cannot appease Vladimir Putin, and we can't afford to be timid in the face of this greatest threat to world peace since World War II. Here on the Senate floor, several weeks ago, I shared a maxim of another Russian leader, Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Soviet Union, of course, at the time. This is something I suspect that Mr. Putin agrees with. Lenin said, "You probe with bayonets. If you find mush, you push. If you find steel, you withdraw." In short, if people like Vladimir Lenin and Vladimir Putin are met with weakness, they're going to keep coming. If they're met with strength, they may withdraw. So President Putin clearly subscribes to this worldview. He doesn't respect weakness. In fact, weakness is a provocation. It encourages him. A weak opponent is Putin's greatest desire, and President Biden, unfortunately, in not acting more forcefully and taking the initiative as only leaders can do, is playing into his hand. The Biden administration has time and time again eventually come around to do the right thing when it comes to arming the Ukrainians. But unfortunately, it's only been after there's been a public outcry or more pressure from Congress or President Zelensky. Last year, President Biden waived sanctions on Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This, of course, is a natural gas pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany. One of the things even now the Germans have recognized is their vulnerability to the monopoly that Russia has when it comes to providing oil and gas to Europe. As Russian troops built up on Ukraine's border, President Biden suggested that some attacks on Ukrainian sovereignty would be, quote, minor intrusions and perhaps disregarded by the United States, he implied. President Biden ignored the advice of virtually all of his advisors and missed the window to impose paralyzing sanctions on Russia before the invasion. And now the administration continues to refuse to facilitate the transfer of these Polish fighter jets. In standard fashion, the administration seems to be a little confused by this crisis, afraid to say yes and too afraid to say no. I'm reminded of President Obama's statement of leading from behind, which appears to be an approach embraced now by President Biden. Mr. President, strong words are important, but they don't defend against rockets or cruise missiles. Sanctions are important, but they won't take out a Russian tank. Humanitarian aid is important, but only if it's delivered on a timely basis and when it's needed. And waiting and seeing what will develop next and then responding after the fact rather than anticipating the need is not particularly effective. As I said, I believe we have a moral obligation to stand with Ukraine and help its people defend their way of life. We should not be in a position of telling President Zelensky, yes, you have asked us for these defensive arms, you've asked us for these airplanes, we're going to give you just what we think that you need. I don't think that should be our position. We ought to ask President Zelensky what he needs and provide it forthwith. We want to help Ukraine defeat Russian forces and repel them from their territory entirely, not just extend the length of this terrible war. The most effective way to do that is to supply Ukraine with the assets they need as quickly as possible. To start with, the Biden administration should reevaluate its decision to reject Poland's aircraft offer. These airplanes are needed for Ukraine to maintain the air superiority over Russian forces, and they need them now and not at some distant date in the future. And we need to continue to find ways to put American weaponry into the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. Back in World War II, the United States was known as the arsenal of democracy. And again, in a bill that I've introduced called the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act, we can do that again. I'm proud to have worked with a group of bipartisan senators, including Senators Cardin, Wicker, and Shaheen, to introduce this legislation. This legislation authorizes the president to enter into lend-lease agreements like we did in World War II, which probably saved Britain from domination by Nazi Germany. We can do this again by providing Ukrainian forces with the weapons they need to defend their country. This legislation was included in various packages designed to support Ukraine, but unfortunately, those packages never made their way to the Senate floor. There's broad bipartisan for this lend-lease provision, and it will give the United States the ability to send the exact type of military support Ukraine needs without a lot of red tape or unnecessary delays. Our support for Ukraine is not a provocation for Putin. It's a necessary show of strength, and it's a deterrence. As we search for additional ways to support Ukraine, it was great to hear from President Zelensky. As I said earlier, his bravery and leadership has galvanized the world and has inspired all of us to take action. And I hope his plea for additional aid will persuade President Biden to act with even greater dispatch. This weekend, I'll be traveling with colleagues to Poland with a number of our colleagues, as I say, to visit our friends and allies on the ground and to see for ourselves the sort of humanitarian crisis that Putin's invasion of Ukraine has created. Poland, to its credit, has welcomed thousands of refugees, hundreds of thousands, and continues to deal with the Russian aggression along its borders. I look forward to this opportunity to visit both Poland and Germany and learning more from our partners in Europe, and eager to bring back their input to the Senate for further urgent action.
Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the Corley nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Jacqueline Scott Corley of California to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of California.
The question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr.